There are a lot of people that are now railing and jumping up and down that were absolutely silent from 2001 to 2007 when people were making tax cuts and giving 65% of it to people that made a handsome amount of money on this cockamamie theory that it was going to trickle down, and it didn't. But I didn't hear a thing from people in the gentleman's position at that point in time. We went into Iraq, and people were championing George Bush going into probably the worst foreign policy era ever made in this country, costing us not just billions of dollars in lives, but going forward going to cost us trillions of dollars. Silence. When we extended the tax cuts at the end of last year, but half of the debt problem, didn't hear a lot from people who now raise their voice in indignation, but we could have wiped out half of the debt. As I mentioned earlier, $1.1 trillion in tax expenditures, money going out to people as favors, to special interests. Don't hear a peep. And in fact, somebody who now says that they want to work together, let's work on this commonly. Don't want to look at my children at Thanksgiving. Well, then tell your children that you were the one on the Republican side of the aisle that said, you know what, we have to look at everything. We have to put the military budget on the table as well as other spending programs. We have to understand that spending also means tax expenditures, and we'll put that on the table as well. And we may not be able to give incentives for big corporations to take jobs overseas. We may have to reverse those incentives, and we may have to make them pay their fair share. Because there is a way we can lower the corporate rate if we get rid of the loopholes and still make sure they pay more than we're paying now, which is nothing in too many cases. And we can make sure that we have the revenues that we need, because it's not just a spending problem. And you can be the first on your side in all your indignation to say, I get that. I understand when you take $1.7 trillion out that used to be here, and you give tax cuts on that basis, and you have all these tax expenditures, that it's more than a spending problem. And I understand why my neighbors are out of work, why they're not doing their construction jobs anymore, because we're not spending money on roads and bridges and water and sewer projects, and the things that we need that are crumbling around us while other countries are investing in their economies. And that even though you were silent during 2001 and 2007, we were disinvesting in research, basic research. Even though all of our CEOs and the companies that you care so much were saying, we need $16 billion more in basic research, and we need to get an EAPA program in there for high-risk, high-reward research, and they still, in Mr. Ryan's budgets and others, don't put money in for these types of things. This is what generates jobs. This is what it does. It means that you have to stand up and not just say that we all ought to work together, but you have to do it. Many people on this side of the aisle have expressed an interest in opening the entire project, to putting everything on the table. And we understand that. But when the discussion around the budget, the Ryan budget, is just about cutting programs that give people security in their lives and make them think that this country works for them as well, and it's all about loading up more tax cuts on the people who benefited most in the last decade but did so little with it, and it's all about making sure that they can get their bonuses and they have fancy retirement programs, but we're attacking Medicare, trying to privatize Social Security, switching from defined benefit programs to defined contribution programs, and robbing the American people of their security, this sort of sounds hollow, and all the indignation in the world doesn't really register when that's the case. So I'll be watching very consciously for you to be the first in your indignation to turn to your colleagues and say, you know what, everything's on the table, all spending, tax expenditures, the military budget, discretionary spending, revenue